Hello and welcome. Can there be real peace without dialogue involving all the parties in a conflict? It's a dilemma the US has had to face in dealing with the Taliban. The latest American plan for Afghanistan involves reintegrating Taliban fighters into Afghan society, but the challenge is sorting out the die-hard insurgents from those willing to change. Afghanistan's President Hamid Karzai has said he wants to talk to Taliban leaders and has even asked Saudi Arabia to reach out to the group in a move aimed at national reconciliation. But for the US, which has the bulk of troops in Afghanistan, this strategy goes further than it would like. US Secretary of State Hillary Clinton has made it clear that only Taliban who renounce violence and agree to abide by Afghanistan's constitution should be included in any reintegration efforts. Some analysts say it's not necessarily that the US is strictly opposed to talking to Taliban leaders, but rather that they would prefer to wait until the troop escalation has weakened the Taliban before any dialogue takes place. To that end, the US has spent the last week holding press briefings and waging a communications campaign about their pending assault in Helmand province, most likely on the city of Marja, where Taliban forces have regrouped. So on today's show, we ask who from the Taliban will the US be willing to talk to, and what will that dialogue mean for the future of Afghanistan? Remember, you can join our conversation with your questions and comments. You can send an SMS or an email, and we also welcome your phone calls on the show. Well, joining me now from San Francisco is Tamim Ansari, the best-selling author of Destiny Disrupted, A History of the World Through Islamic Eyes. Mr. Ansari grew up in Kabul before moving to America. His latest work, The Widow's Husband, is an epic historic novel set against the background of Great Britain's attempt to occupy Afghanistan. And here in Washington is Matthew Ho, a former U.S. Marine, Corps Captain and Foreign Service officer who has seen time in Iraq and Afghanistan. In October, he sent shockwaves to the U.S. government when he resigned from his post in the Foreign Service, citing his disagreement with America's pursuit of the Afghan war. Gentlemen, I welcome you both to the show. And Matt Ho, if I could start with you, good to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, so it's come around to the idea of talking to the Taliban now, and you've said that you see some value in this approach, but you think it's not going to achieve much in the actual war, do you? But you think that, you say the Allies may be able to buy off some guys. So how should that negotiation move forward?
Sure, and as you said in your promo, there's two elements to this. There's reintegration, which is the buying off of the lower level fighters, and reconciliation, which is the national level efforts at ending the war. And I think that's the key, is the reconciliation end. And like in your promo, you said peace, a lasting peace. What we need to do is we need to find a solution, a resolution to a decades-old civil war in Afghanistan. Basically what you have, as I view it, is you've got, it comes down to an economics problem almost. It's a scarcity of resources. As long as you have a government in Afghanistan that only includes about 70% of the Afghan people, those other 30% that are outside of that government, that are outside of the resources of that government, are going to rebel and fight against that government. So until we find some type of resolution, some type of political resolution to end the war, it's just going to continue.
Well, so you have two types of Taliban fighters. That's basically what's being touted, as you say, those the low-level ones, but they're also essentially considered mercenary. They're not there for any sort of big ideological reason, but they're because they need the money, or that they have almost no other way to support themselves. So how does that split in the Taliban, or that potential difference in those two types of Taliban, affect the way the peace negotiation would move forward? Because presumably those who are still diehard and ideologically opposed to the US and its allies are going to be hard to turn.
Right. Yeah, I tend to agree with most analysts when they term the $10 a day Taliban. Money is very important for them in terms of why they fight. However, I see it not so much as a factor of I need this money to feed my kids, but as this money as provided to me from the Taliban, who are based in Quetta, this allows me to control my local area. This allows me to control my valley, controls my village. Most of the groups that are fighting us in Afghanistan, particularly in the south as well as in the east, I don't believe they ascribe to the white banner of the Taliban. I don't believe they ascribe to the Taliban's ideas, their ideology, or their ideas of Pashtunwali, or the purity of that in terms of certain elements of it. But they do not want to be occupied, and they do not want to be governed by a government based out of Kabul that is run by urban Pashtuns and by Tajiks, Uzbeks, Hazaras, non-Pashtun.
And certainly not allied forces.
And certainly not be occupied by a foreign power.
Tamim Ansari, great to have you with us, and congratulations on the success of your written work on the books. The U.S. Defense Secretary has said that that the Taliban are part of a, as he says, political fabric of Afghanistan, and effectively saying that the Taliban has to be part of the solution. Considering your views on the country and the way things have gone, how do you regard that, integrating the Taliban?
You know, I think the important thing to realize is that when all this shakes out in Afghanistan, this is going to be basically a conservative Islamic country. And I think the word Taliban kind of shades from an entity that once controlled Afghanistan and was a sort of a stalking horse for Pakistan. It shades off into just the normal rural Afghan people. So I think some process that brings all the elements of Afghan society into some sense of A, participation in a national government, but also B, a sense of control of their local lives. That's the way to go in this situation.
Well, let me put, Tamim, let me put an email we got to you from a viewer by the name of Riz Khan, who wrote in saying, if they want to talk to the Taliban, they have to talk to the central leadership led by Mullah Omar. In order to make these talks a success, they have to make concessions to the Taliban. Now, from what I've read, and I'll talk to Matt about this in a moment, Matt also sees people such as Mullah Omar as instrumental to any negotiated solutions, even though the US is reluctant to engage with him because of the fear that there's some kind of dealing with those who might be responsible, at least be connected to the 9/11 attacks. What sort of role do you see for someone like Mullah Omar in negotiations?
Well, I have to admit that I feel nervous about creating an opening for Mullah Omar and for people like Gulbuddin Hekmatyar to come back into the government. Especially Hekmatyar, he has a long history of being so disruptive and so outside the system. I feel that those guys are just sort of waiting on the edges, and they believe that their fight is succeeding and they're going to be able to come in and take over Afghanistan. And it's important to remember that Tajiks, Uzbeks, urban Pashtuns, all these other groups that were mentioned, although there's a problem with them controlling Afghanistan, they are also part of the Afghan scene, and they have to be part of the negotiated settlement too.
Okay, well, let's get a couple of viewers in. I'll get on to you in a second, Matt, on that. But James in Los Angeles, good to have you with us. What would you like to ask?
Thank you for taking my call, sir. I appreciate it. Yes, I'd like to say, why don't we look at the main motivation that we went into Afghanistan for? You can see what motivated the 9/11 attack at neoconzionistthreat.com. We went in there because we support Israel's brutal oppression of the Palestinian people. Of course we have to talk to the Taliban. I mean, we're sitting here spending billions of dollars, U.S. taxpayer dollars, as America goes broke, all because we support Israel.
Okay.
I mean, that's the bottom line.
All right, James, thanks. I'm also going to get in Aman from D.C. Aman, what would you like to ask or say?
Aman?
Go ahead, Aman.
Yes, sir. I have a question. My question is, I live here in Washington almost 20 years. Mm-hmm. I just came from Africa also too, but I'm just a little bit confused. I really have sympathy for the Palestinians. They are entitled to have a home. Rather than when I see another, everywhere I see in Chechnya and Philippines, all everywhere in the world, Muslim and Christian, Muslim and Jews, Muslim and,
okay, so
every different what is going on.
Okay, Aman, let me get this to Matt. I mean, one of the things is, and this comes up a lot with our viewers and people who watch the U.S. actions around the world. They say that there's an imbalance in the way the U.S. works. Do you feel that the Israeli-Palestinian situation has any bearing on what's happened in Afghanistan, as our first viewer James was suggesting?
Unfortunately, I think that has bearing in almost everything we do in foreign policy. It had bearing on our relationship with the Soviet Union, 20 years or so ago, 25 years ago, when we were still fighting the Cold War. And it's still, that conflict carries through at so many different levels. I agree with Tamim. I believe that going back to Afghanistan, though, we need to treat this as a local issue. Other regional powers have to be involved. Pakistan, India, Iran. They all need to be involved in any resolution for Afghanistan. But it needs to be, just like we said, it needs to be inclusive of all Afghans, and it needs to view the way Afghan society has always typically governed itself, which is at the lowest level possible.
Well, let me get back to this, to negotiating with the Taliban, Matt, and give you an email that came in from Morocco. And Osama Allah from Moscow, Morocco, sorry, wrote in saying, "It would be foolish for America to think that giving bribes to Afghan fighters is going to win the war. Afghans are not the kind of people that tolerate any kind of foreign presence in their country." Now, I know you believe there could be a military victory for the US in Afghanistan if it puts in the resources, which you believe it wouldn't. But even a military victory wouldn't lead to any kind of political victory. So that suggests that essentially the US took a dead-end path, which to some degree is what James was also saying from LA.
I agree. If we put in the right amount of resources, which you're talking hundreds and hundreds of thousands of troops and hundreds of billions of dollars committing the time, we could defeat the Taliban in the south of the country militarily. We would not politically defeat them, and we would be stuck in this status quo that we're in right now for indefinitely. And to what end? And to what does that get the United States? What does that get Afghanistan? What does it get the region? So you do have to find a solution, not military. It's very simple. It comes down to people want to govern themselves. It's an issue of self-determination in the southern and eastern parts of Afghanistan, and they do not want to be occupied either by foreign powers or by a government that does not represent them.
Well, I want to talk to you and Tamim Ansari about the current leadership in Afghanistan in a moment. We're going to take a very short break here first, though. More of our discussion in a moment. Don't go away. Welcome back. We're looking at the new American strategy for Afghanistan, a controversial one that involves reaching out to the Taliban. Discussing this, I have with me Tamim Ansari, the best-selling author of Destiny Disrupted, A History of the World Through Islamic Eyes, and Matthew Ho, the former senior U.S. civilian representative in Afghanistan who resigned his post there, citing his disagreement with the war. Tamim Ansari, let me ask you how you regard the fact that President Karzai, for a lot of people, came in on a very flawed election. He's back in power. Basically, for a lot of people, he's not the right person to lead the country into the next stage.
You're right, and I think that in that last election, if Karzai had put all his resources into securing the legitimacy of the election rather than his own re-election, he would have done such a service to the country that on some other occasion he might have come back as a legitimate president of the country. That said, I would say that the problem of corruption in the government of Afghanistan goes much beyond Karzai's individual failings. It's so built into the fact that all the people involved in the government don't really believe that they're on the cusp of creating a new Afghanistan. So I think there's an endemic kind of attitude of I'm going to get mine now and worry about the rest later. Right. And that's a problem.
Tamim, let me put an email that we got from a viewer in Bangladesh. Zahir Ahmed wrote in saying, Afghans fear that the US has a hidden agenda. That will make any talks difficult and controversial. Now, it doesn't really help that President Karzai has been touring the country pretty much hinting or suggesting that the US has a disagreeable agenda. That doesn't really help the situation.
Well, that's true, and it doesn't help the situation, and I think Karzai is playing to a domestic political sort of securing his own position. But I think that the larger question is that the basic mission for the U.S. is to disarm that idea that it has a hidden agenda. What the U.S. is doing now, it's not losing a military battle to the Taliban, it's losing the battle to define the narrative of what it's doing in Afghanistan. Right. And it would like to have the narrative be, we're here to restore civil order and to aid in the reconstruction, and then we're going to get out.
Matt, why has America and the Allies, why have they stuck by Hamid Karzai considering his track record?
That's a very interesting question, and something I get quite a lot. Why did we pick this man to begin with? Why did we stick with him? Why 8 years later are we still with Hamid Karzai, particularly after these elections? I'm not a fan of Hamid Karzai. A lot of government folks, a lot of military folks aren't, but he's who we have there right now. He was put in place because we thought he could bridge that gap across the country. He was someone who we thought would reach out to Pashtuns and get them to disassociate themselves from the Taliban. I think it's our failing to understand the differences within Pashtun society, that he doesn't represent all Pashtuns, just one set of tribes. So he's our guy we have there now, and we have to support him in order to bring about a peace, and then let the Afghan people decide whether or not they want him to lead them.
Well, Tamim, what's your view on the parliamentary elections are scheduled for towards the end of May, if they're not delayed? I mean, do you expect any major changes that will come with those?
No, I don't expect any major changes with those. I think they're probably going to be a troubled set of elections. And the other thing I want to say is that it would be great to have as the leader of Afghanistan the person who is the leader of all Afghans. Unfortunately, there is no such person.
Let's get a call in. Actually, we've got Roberto waiting on the phone patiently from Ireland. Roberto, go ahead.
Okay, good afternoon to all.
Thank you.
My name is Roberto. I'm calling from Republic of Ireland. I just want to know, when they are saying that the United States will talk to the Taliban, I mean, what do they mean exactly? I mean, would they talk directly to the Taliban leader, Mullah Omar, or Mullah Omar would be excluded?
All right. Now, we've touched on that a bit, but Matt, let me get a question to you that also touches on this from, it came in by email to our Facebook page, Abdulaziz Al-Sakaf, who wrote in saying, talking to the Taliban make all the difference. It can surely achieve what guns cannot. They should have thought about this a while back. It could have saved lives. Why has it taken so much time for such, serious engagement? But also, doesn't that contradict the message, that extra troops are going in, President Obama's surge into Afghanistan? Doesn't that send a mixed message? Is it an exit strategy for the U.S., as many believe?
I can tell you I'm more optimistic this past 2 weeks, than I have been over the last 5-6 months regarding Afghanistan, particularly after the president announced a troop surge in December, and then his closest advisors came out continually saying, hey, this is there's no exact withdrawal date for this. We are there almost. It seemed like we were making this open-ended commitment. Now we've seen over the last week or two a whole flurry of comments from across the spectrum, from U.S. leaders, Secretary Gates and General McChrystal, to Harman Karzai, to just today, the British Defense Minister said, hey, we need more, we need to pursue negotiations. That's the only way to end this. There's no military solution to this war. There's only a political solution to this war. It's been going on for 35 years, this civil war, and we have to find a political settlement to it.
You feel, Matt, that there's something good that will come out of setting a firm date like, say, July 2011, because it'll push President Karzai to taking action rather than sitting back, yeah?
Absolutely, and I think we've seen that in these last couple of months. I can tell you when I was there in the spring and summer, in the early fall of this year, working in both the east of Afghanistan and the south of Afghanistan, I did not come across any Afghan government officials who I felt had a legitimate or honest interest in reconciliation with the opposing side. We do have to, unfortunately, we do have to reach out to Mullah Omar, we do have to reach out to Hekmani, we do have to reach out to Haqqani, and we do have to, because they are the leaders of their movements. And I think what's important too with these negotiations is reforming the Afghan government into a system that will work in Afghanistan. We're trying to implement a centralized form of government that's just not appropriate for that country.
Well, Tamim Ansari, President Karzai has just said recently, by 5 years, this is quoting him, by 5 years Afghanistan should be able to provide security for its people so we are no longer a burden on the shoulders of the international community. Do you believe him? Is that a realistic deadline, 5 years, especially when the troop withdrawal is due in just over a year?
That's just a number, who can tell? That's an imponderable. I would say that, if everything goes right and this civilian surge and this restoration of civil order takes hold, maybe it could happen. I think it's also important, however, to make sure that the negotiations that are aimed at settling the civil disorder in Afghanistan has Pakistan, Iran, and these other countries involved in that, because it isn't just a question of getting U.S. troops out. It's a question of getting the U.S. troops out and then keeping everybody else out too.
Right. Well, talking of Pakistan, we have John, who's also been waiting patiently to join us with a question on the phone. John, go ahead.
Well, I want to ask that if the U.S. Army, U.S. government, and Afghan government, Karzai, are going to negotiate and compromise with Taliban and other people, do you think they will let the other nations like Hazara, Uzbek, and Tajik to be survive in the future? I do not agree with you people that because if American government is going to hand over anything to Taliban, they already have much weapons to decide totally Afghanistan. So in the future, they will remove totally each nation from Afghanistan.
Okay, so that's that's an interesting point you make there. And Matt, I'll put that to you. The idea that the Taliban, once in the system, can actually then effectively take over again.
I don't think so. I think it could if this was done done in a less than thorough manner. But this needs to be a very thorough, very regulated settlement. I think you need to bring in the other powers in the region, India, Pakistan, Iran, and particularly the Taliban. In the mid-90s, the Taliban rose to power and they were able to take Kabul and large parts of the country based on a support from Pakistan. They rode to power on the back of Pakistani rupees, basically. I don't think Pakistan is going to back the Taliban to those lengths as they did in the 90s. I think they're still their favorite horse in the country, but they are not going to back them the way they backed them in the 90s. I think it's
because of the overspill, because they felt the effects of...
I think so, because they now face a Pashtun insurgency in their country that they did not face before.
Well, Tamim Ansari, you've been very vocal and active and a very visible figure in calling for change in Afghanistan. You were calling on the United States to bring about positive political change from 2001. And I wonder, if you look back over the past 8 years since the US went in and looking at the conflict for that long, what real benefit do you think the Afghan people have had from what's happened, from the military action taken by the US and its allies?
Well, I'm not sure about the military action, but for a while there was like a race between the restoration of order and the proliferation of chaos, and it was a question of which would reach the tipping point first. And in these 8 years, a lot of schools have been built, a lot of clinics have been built. There were a lot of people initially who had spent their whole lives being mujahideen at war, and they opened shops and they started building a life. So, so I think initially a lot of stuff happened, and unfortunately, this race between chaos and order, around 2006 or so, it reached a tipping point towards chaos, and I think that's what we have to kind of reverse.
Matt, 20 seconds. Are you optimistic things are going to improve in Afghanistan? Can you see a short-term success?
I think we have to look past short-term. We have to look mid-term, long-term. Short-term success is what we've had continually since 2001, and here we are in 2010 having this conversation still. So we have to look for something that's going to give us a lasting peace settlement in Afghanistan, some type of power sharing agreement.
Matt Ho, thank you very much. Tamim Ansari, thank you for joining us there from San Francisco.
Thank you.
And thank you for being with us. Remember, you can follow the show on Facebook and see what we're up to there. You can give us feedback on the topics and post your questions and comments. That's it from me and the team. Join us next time.